today for this call. I'll be the moderator for this presentation today. I'm here to just help facilitate questions for the presenter and assist you in any way that, that I can during this presentation. Like Carrie mentioned, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please do type them in the chat, and periodically during the presentation, we will stop and I can ask the questions to our presenter and he can answer them. And we also ask that everyone please keep your microphone muted. You can have your camera on, that's okay. But yeah, so again, just type your questions in the chat and we can get through them later. But for now, I'm going to hand this off to Jean, who is our presenter for the Understanding Alzheimer's and Dementia presentation.
Thank you, Han, and thank you, Carrie. Let me get my screen shared here so you can see my slides. And I want to thank everybody for attending today, and hopefully you can see my slides up there. So again, my name is Gene Giramonti, and I'm joining you here from my home in Santa Rosa. So I'm a Sonoma County resident and a fond user of the library system. So thank you, Carrie, for inviting us to present this program. I am currently a volunteer community educator with the Alzheimer's Association, and I was also recently nominated to the Northern California, Northern Nevada chapter board of directors. So I'm very involved with the association, and I came to the association through my experience as a full-time caregiver for my late husband, Arthur, who was diagnosed in 2011 with both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and he passed away in 2018. And I had retired shortly before that and decided after he passed away that it would be a worthy thing for me to get more involved with this topic. And that's why I decided to do these kinds of presentations and work with the association in my volunteer status to help get the word out about this disease and how we can take measures to end it. So thank you again for connecting. And this program is designed for those who are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's and other dementias. And it features information from dementia experts and perspectives from individuals living with Alzheimer's or living with dementia and their care partners. Now, care partner is a term that many prefer over caregiver, while the individual with Alzheimer's is in the early stage when he or she may not need much assistance with daily tasks, but still benefits from the support of family and friends. So I'm sure you're all here for different reasons, but hopefully we will address your concerns and give you the knowledge that you need to proceed. And so here are some objectives for today's program. This is what we will be delivering to you and what you'll know by the end. And that is, first of all, to compare Alzheimer's and dementia and the difference in the two terminology. Recognize how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain itself. We'll list the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease. We'll identify the 3 stages of the disease, and we'll talk about the FDA-approved treatments that can address some symptoms of the disease. We'll describe the research that's going on, and finally, we'll talk about the resources available through the Alzheimer's Association. So I'll break a couple of times during the program for questions. So as Carrie said, if you'd like to enter that question in the chat box, you can enter it at any time, and then when we break for questions, we'll address those. So let's start by talking about the impact of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is a global crisis, and you likely are hearing more and more about it in your personal lives and on the news. So let's start off by seeing what you know about the impact of Alzheimer's in the United States. So throughout the program, we'll have a few of these little questions, and feel free to answer in the chat box. We'll just take a few seconds to get those answers, and then I'll give you the correct information. So the first question is, approximately how many Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's? What do you think the answer is?
I'm going to give it a couple seconds here, see if anybody wants to type in the chat. So I have, a couple of them are coming in. Let's see. One person said 11 million. Another one, 11 million. Someone else said 1 in 4.
Well, the correct answer is more than 6 million. And barring the development of medical breakthroughs to prevent, slow, or cure Alzheimer's disease, this number is projected to reach nearly 13 million by the year 2050. And worldwide, an estimated 50 million people are currently living with dementia. So you ready for the next question? Let's try another one here. I can get my cursor to move for me. About how many Americans provide unpaid care for individuals living with Alzheimer's or other dementias? Let's see what you know about this, or what you think you know about this.
I have one saying over 11 million.
Well, that person is correct. It is over 11 million. Currently, more than 11 million Americans are providing unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or another dementia. Now, Alzheimer's impacts caregivers both at home and at their work. More than 80% of care provided at home is delivered by family members, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. Over half of employed caregivers report having to go in late, take time off, or quit altogether due to caregiver demands. These caregivers provided approximately 15.3 billion hours of care last year. And if that were valued on in the marketplace, it would be worth nearly $257 billion. So it's a huge issue. As you can see, this disease takes a personal impact on the individuals facing it, as well as a financial one. I can personally identify with the challenge of both working at a demanding job that I had and caring for Arthur. And it became increasingly difficult because he couldn't be on his own. Over time, it became impossible for him to be alone. So that became a financial burden as well. But trying to balance the pressures of caring for a loved one and working a full-time job, you can imagine the stress, and some of you may have experienced that yourself. So let's learn a little bit more about the impact of Alzheimer's disease. What do you think of these statistics? Is anything surprising to you? So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can, and we'll talk about this at the end, but you can visit the website at alz.org/facts. So let's talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. You may hear the terms Alzheimer's and dementia used interchangeably. They are related, but they're different. In this next section, we're going to discuss both Alzheimer's and dementia and how they're related. Before we begin, we're going to test your knowledge again about Alzheimer's disease. So do you think Alzheimer's is a normal part of the aging process? Is that a true or false statement?
All right, we are getting all false.
Well, I'm impressed. We have a very well-informed audience here because it is false. Alzheimer's disease is more than memory loss. It's a progressive and fatal disease that kills nerve cells and tissue in the brain, affecting an individual's ability to remember, think, plan, and ultimately function. Let's try another question here. You didn't think you were going to have to work so hard, did you? So here's another statement. People younger than age 65 can develop Alzheimer's. True or false?
Right, we have a smart crowd here. They say it's true.
Good, good. I'm glad that we're getting the word out here. While most individuals living with the disease are older adults, people younger than 65 can also develop Alzheimer's. This form of the disease is known as younger onset Alzheimer's and sometimes called early onset. In some cases, people develop the disease in their 40s and 50s. So now let's watch a video of one of our experts, Dr. Heather Snyder, who will explain how Alzheimer's and dementias are related.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So as we saw, there are many causes of dementia other than Alzheimer's. However, about 60 to 80% of all dementia cases are caused by Alzheimer's disease. There are numerous types of dementia. Each type has a different cause and symptoms. These listed are just a few classifications. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these different diseases, but if we have time at the end, and if you see anything here, we can return to this slide and talk a little bit more about those. So as we discussed, there are many causes of dementia. A diagnosis of dementia requires further testing to identify the specific disease or condition causing the symptoms. It is very important to seek an accurate early diagnosis. We're going to hear now from a care partner, Gail, about the importance of knowing her husband's diagnosis.
Certainly, having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
So while there is not yet a treatment that can slow or stop Alzheimer's, there is great value in seeking an accurate diagnosis so that you know what you are facing and better understand what to expect. So a quick recap here of what we've just learned. Dementia is a general term for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging. It is a progressive brain disease. So next we're going to, well, first of all, let me just say, are there any questions in the chat room at this point before I advance?
Yes, there actually is one that came in just now. The Question is, are all of these forms of dementia detectable from early diagnosis, and are there early detectable tests that can be performed?
Well, I'm not an expert on all of those, but the answer is yes to Alzheimer's, Lewy body, Parkinson's, things like that. We now have, and there is another program, not in today's program, where we talk about what goes on in the diagnostic process, but there are tests and scans that can narrow down and accurately diagnose, especially with Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's will show up as compromised brain tissue with the plaques and tangles that we heard about. So, and there is some genetic testing available that'll come up a little later in this program, but that isn't highly recommended, both because of cost and because of complexity. So I can't answer the question for all of those diseases that were listed in that slide, but definitely with Alzheimer's, it can be diagnosed early, and it is advisable to get that diagnosis if you feel you're having symptoms or someone close to you is having symptoms. Hopefully that answers that question.
Great, thank you. That is all we have in the chat for now.
Okay. So we know that Alzheimer's is a brain disease. The brain is our most complex organ. It's also our most powerful, despite weighing only about 3 pounds. So we're going to hear from one of our experts about how Alzheimer's affects the brain.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alice Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, what we call the formation of plaques and tangles. Now, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and is thought to impact memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. The cerebrum fills up most of your skull. It is part of the brain most involved in remembering, problem solving, thinking, and even feelings. There are about 100 billion nerve cells, or neurons, throughout the brain that transmit messages in order for us to create memories, feelings, and thoughts. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain tissue loss, or what we call shrinkage, and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, problems with thinking, planning, behavioral issues, and even at the end stages, problems with swallowing.
So just a quick recap here. More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alois Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, the formation of these plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's causes nerve cells to die, which leads to shrinkage in the brain, and the brain changes result in changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. So now we're going to talk about the risk factors that we face. Everyone with a brain is at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There are a few known factors that increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Let's see if you know which one is the most common. So here's another question for you. Which of these options do you think is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease? Is it genetics, family history, or age?
Right. We are getting 2 answers of genetics. One says 2 say family history, and then age, and then genetics.
So we've got the waterfront covered, which is actually a good thing. Age is the greatest known risk factor, but all of these factors are true. All are risk factors. It's just that age is the greatest risk factor. And some people don't quite understand the differentiation between genetics and family history. Genetics is the genes that we're all born with. It's what we're given in our DNA. Whereas family history would include socioeconomic factors, lifestyle, behavioral sorts of concerns, the way people live. And more research is showing, and that's covered in a different program that I'll just briefly say, more and more of the research is showing that living a healthy lifestyle, meaning good nutrition, good exercise, good socialization with others, and good cognitive stimulation. Those 4 factors, which all have to do with our environmental or our behavioral factors, are showing some positive results in staving off or reducing the risk of dementia. So anyway, that's the difference between genetics and family history. So I want to reiterate that although Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, age is the greatest known risk factor. We're gonna hear from Dr. Snyder again about risk factors.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are 2 categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So let's take a look at some populations who are at a higher risk for developing the disease. In addition to the main risk factors for the general population, Hispanics, African Americans, and women are at a higher risk for Alzheimer's. Research shows that older Hispanics are about 1.5 times as likely as older whites to develop Alzheimer's and other dementias, while older African Americans are about twice as likely to develop the disease as older whites. The reason for these differences is not well understood, but researchers believe that higher rates of vascular disease in these groups may also put them at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's. In other words, hypertension or cardiovascular health concerns can play a role here, partly because it's the cardiovascular system that nourishes the brain. In fact, with every beat of the heart, literally 25% of the blood pumped goes directly to the brain. So when we compromise that ability of our cardiovascular system to operate normally, we may be compromising the nourishment that our brain is getting. Women are more likely than men to develop the disease. An estimated 3.8 million American women are living with the disease today. We know that women live longer than men, making them more likely to develop Alzheimer's. However, longevity and lower death rates can only partially explain this difference. Researchers are exploring how genetic differences between men and women may impact disease risk. So to summarize here, Alzheimer's disease involves the failure of nerve cells, the exact cause of which is still uncertain. However, research has identified risk factors that increase the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. Age being the greatest known risk factor, an individual's risk for developing the disease increases at age 65. Family history is a known risk factor. Having a parent or sibling with the disease increases an individual's risk. There are 2 types of genes that are associated with Alzheimer's: risk genes and deterministic genes. And finally, Hispanics, African Americans, and women are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's. So before I move on, any questions about what we've just discussed here?
No questions in the chat. Again, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat, whether it's during the presentation, we will get to the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Han. And again, we'll have time at the end if you think of something later. So now let's talk about the stages of Alzheimer's disease. No two individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. Let's hear from another expert on why this is the case, as well as from some individuals describing what it's like to live in the early stage of Alzheimer's disease.
One of the things that impacts our brain is all the other things that can happen to us as we age. And we know that Alzheimer's, the most common risk factor for getting Alzheimer's disease is age. But we also have lots of other things that go wrong with us as we age. And so how those other health factors impact our brain can also impact how Alzheimer's presents in other people.
It's a different kind of forgetting. It really, really is. It's not just forgetting where I put my car keys. It's much deeper than that. And for example, I cannot read a book. I used to be a voracious reader because by the time I turn a page, I have forgotten what I had read. And if you're reading a novel, you have to know what transpired before in order for you to continue to read on. And so I can't read a novel. So I've even stopped trying.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life. You know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
I'm like an overachiever. And when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive. And I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor's. And so that becomes a little disconcerting at times to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
So I can really identify with each of those individuals in terms of what I observed about my late husband, especially the first person who spoke talked about how she could no longer read. And that was one of the early signs of Arthur's condition, because he was an avid reader. He had retired just before he was diagnosed, and he spent a lot of time reading because he was a he loved history, and he always had 2 or 3 books going. And I noticed that he had not been reading much. The bookmarks weren't moving. And I asked him one time, "Hey, how come you're not finishing those books?" And he said, "Because I keep forgetting the page before. I keep turning the pages backward, and I can never seem to get finished." So that's one example. And then also he had taken over the responsibility for paying the bills and keeping kind of the household going. Well, he began he lost his ability to differentiate between junk mail and good mail, and some of the bills were being tossed in the shredder, other bills were being paid incorrectly, and so that was a real serious sign that something was going haywire. But so again, the individuals we just heard from are living in the early stage of the disease, and symptoms worsen over time for everyone. However, people progress through stages of Alzheimer's at different rates as their abilities change. On average, a person with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after diagnosis, but can live as long as 20 years, depending on other factors. I'll add to what I was talking about earlier, the question about diagnosis of the disease, early diagnosis. The last gentleman who spoke there talked about getting multiple memory tests. And that, I didn't mention it earlier, but that is one of the key components of an accurate diagnosis, is having a qualified psychologist administer a standardized test that everybody receives when they're being tested for their memory. And it's basically 30-some questions that are relatively easy questions, like, who is the current president? What city are you in? Name 5 objects that are red. Draw the face of a clock showing 1:30, or whatever, questions like that, that most of us would be easy to answer. But that, when they conduct that test and interpret that test over a period of time, and multiple times, you can see the digression or the worsening of symptoms, because they begin to answer fewer and fewer of those questions. So now let's hear what Dr. Snyder has to explain about the 3 general stages of Alzheimer's disease.
Alzheimer's affects everyone differently. As a result, it's difficult to place a person in a specific stage of the disease. However, there are 3 general stages that are commonly referred to as early, middle, and late stage Alzheimer's. In a medical context, you may hear these stages referred to as mild, moderate, and severe. In the early stage of Alzheimer's, an individual may be able to function independently. However, they may start noticing more frequent memory lapses. Friends and family may also begin to notice difficulties in the person, and a healthcare provider may be able to detect problems in memory or concentration by conducting a detailed medical interview. Middle stage Alzheimer's is typically the longest stage and can last for many years. Damage to the brain cells can make it difficult to express thoughts and perform routine tasks, and this can lead to increased feelings of frustration and anger. In the final stage of the disease, an individual loses the ability to hold a conversation, control their movements, or respond to the environment around them. Cognitive skills, that is, their memory, thinking, and reasoning skills, continue to decline, and this can lead to personality changes and need for round-the-clock care.
As mentioned, it's important to remember that the stages of Alzheimer's are general, and because each person living with the disease has a unique experience, we can't always neatly place an individual into one specific stage. In fact, some people may exhibit symptoms that overlap the stages. However, the stages do allow you to gain a general understanding of the progression of the disease. As Alzheimer's progresses, the individual's behaviors will change, as does the role of a caregiver. These stages can help caregivers prepare for what to expect and understand how best to respond. So just to recap this segment on the stages, the 3 stages of Alzheimer's disease, early, middle, and late, are sometimes referred to as mild, moderate, and severe in a medical context. No 2 individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. And that's really why it's important that if we've had experience with a relative or a friend or someone, and then we encounter another person that has the disease, we may wonder, well, why are they so different? Why are they, their symptoms appear to be different? And that's because we're all individuals first and foremost with our basic character and personality, but Alzheimer's disease affects people slightly different ways in the brain. So, any questions so far before we move on to the FDA approved treatments?
Yes, we did get one earlier. This question is, since it is a progressive disease ending in death, is that due to the brain shrinking? And then they also ask, or cells dying?
Well, those two are sort of synonymous. The destruction of brain cells really is at the root of what's happening, and because of the destruction or the death of cells and the connections of the neurons, the brain automatically tends to shrink a bit. And Alzheimer's is a valid cause of death. There is some controversy over whether or not a person actually dies of Alzheimer's disease, or are there other things that happen? But the best answer to that is that because the brain is really the central command center for our entire body, as the brain diminishes in its capacity and health, it can cause problems in other organs or other parts of the body. So while someone could die of an immediate heart attack or stroke, while also experiencing the Alzheimer's disease, it's sort of the chicken and egg question, which was first. But ultimately, it's up to a physician to determine the appropriate cause of death.
Great, thank you, Jean. And then we got two more questions that came in just now.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, at what point should the family insist the doctor to test the patient? Like when the patient can fake it with the doctor in early stage?
That's a great question, because not all physicians have the same level of understanding or experience in handling patients who are in that early stage. But I think if you can't easily convince your primary care physician that you want those tests, then I think that's a good time to maybe ask for a second opinion. And most physicians shouldn't object to getting a second opinion. It should be a welcome exploration of what is going on. So I think you have to be a good advocate for getting tested. Usually a referral to a qualified neurologist is the proper sort of course to take when you're concerned about someone's symptoms. And it's important when someone goes to the doctor with symptoms that those closest to the person are part of that examination process, because again, if memory is affected or if a person's cognitive abilities are beginning to wane, they may not be able to give an accurate picture to their physician. So it's helpful to have a second or third person there to verify or validate what is going on.
Perfect.
When we get to the, just add real quickly, I'll give you the number for our helpline at the end as well. And if you have further questions and that I'm not the best to answer as a medical qualified person, that helpline can be very useful in answering these kinds of questions as well.
Great, thank you, Jean. And then, so we have two more questions. One just came in as well. And so did you want to get to them, or
Sure.
we can...
Sure, I think we're okay on time, so that'd be fine.
Okay, perfect. So we have two. So this first one is, does it have to do with the brain forgetting to tell parts of the body to function? For example, like breathing. And this might have to go along with the first question I had asked about what is since it is a progressive disease ending in death, what does it do to?
I hesitate to get too much into the answer on this because we're getting into a medical realm and I'm not really qualified for that. But again, because the brain is progressively being compromised, and again, because the brain is a central command center, other functions in the body, such as breathing, swallowing is another one that often happens, but that's generally in the later stage of Alzheimer's. If we're looking to get diagnosed in the early stage, it's not common that those kinds of other bodily functions would be compromised. It's mainly the memory, the thinking, and the cognitive recall. I'm not sure if that completely answers your question. Again, our helpline may be a better source for the experts that can handle some of the more medical issues.
Perfect. Yes, we will provide the helpline number, which is very, very useful. A lot of people have mentioned that they call that almost every day just to get to talk to someone. And so we will provide that. Thank you, Jean. And then here's the last question we have. Someone asked, can you discuss when to revoke driving privileges?
Well, the physicians are required to report that to the Department of Motor Vehicles when an actual diagnosis has been rendered. So that sometimes prevents people from wanting to get diagnosed because they're afraid that their driving privilege will be revoked. But that is the law, and the physician, the medical community has an obligation to report it. But it's for good reason, obviously. I know that that I was a passenger with my husband, and he almost drove us into a ditch. And I had been ignoring, the fact that he seemed perfectly capable of driving, but something happened that one time where he just wasn't in control, and I had to shout stop to save us from getting into an accident. So it's really critical that we not let a person dictate when they can and should drive. That really needs to be a medical determination.
Perfect. That is all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Han. Thank you for your good questions too. So we'll start this module by seeing what you already know about treatments available to Alzheimer's. So we're going to get another question in front of you here. If I can get my, there we go. Okay, the statement is, current drugs help address symptoms, but do not treat the underlying cause of the disease. So how many of you think that is a true versus a false statement?
All right, I am getting all truths.
Again, there's a very enlightened group here. It is true. While these medications do not stop the damage that Alzheimer's causes to brain cells, they may help lessen or stabilize symptoms for a limited time. So we're going to hear from an expert again about these medications.
There are currently several drugs that are FDA approved to treat the cognitive symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease. They treat the symptoms, but they don't treat the underlying cause. So eventually people will progress, but they do treat some of the symptoms and help people for a time. So the first class of drugs are cholinesterase inhibitors. These drugs work to prevent the breakdown of acetylcholine, which is a chemical messenger found in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. There are 3 FDA-approved drugs that are in this class of drugs. There's Aricept, there's Exelon, and there's Razidine. There's another class of drugs that's modulates glutamate, which is another chemical messenger in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. And this drug is called Namenda. And then there's a final class, which is actually a combination of cholinesterase inhibitors and glutamate modulator, and this is called Namzaric.
So because everyone experiences Alzheimer's differently, these treatments work in varying degrees and are not effective for everyone. An accurate diagnosis is important to ensure that the proper treatment is prescribed. Drug misuse could lead to negative side effects. Now, you probably have heard about more recently about a new medication called aducanumab, which is a mouthful. The brand name is going under the name Aduhelm, and that was approved, I believe it was in May, by the Food and Drug Administration. There's some controversy about this drug, primarily because of its cost and its method of deliverance, which is through infusion on a monthly basis. Now, people in the early stage of Alzheimer's welcome this advance. The Alzheimer's Association stands behind the research behind the drug and is working hard to, with insurance companies and others, to try and bring the cost down and continue research on how it's administered. But the people who have early stage Alzheimer's, you want to try it at least if they can afford it and if they can get access to it. It can only be prescribed with an accurate diagnosis of the existence of those plaques and tangles. And its effectiveness is that it looks like it slows down the development of those plaques and tangles. Again, it's not a curative drug. It's not going to stop Alzheimer's, but if it extends someone's quality of life, then those who are experiencing the disease feel that it's a worthwhile drug to take. So it's not a perfect situation, but it does show at least the advancements in research and the ability to create drugs that treat at least a little bit more than these three that have been mentioned. So just a real quick recap here on these drugs. There's the three types: the cholinesterase inhibitors, which is the Aricept, glutamate modulators, which are the, I'm drawing a blank. But at any rate, these treatments only address some symptoms of Alzheimer's in some people, and they do not treat the underlying cause of the disease. Okay, so speaking of research, let's talk a bit about the advancement of research in this area. In the last decade, researchers have made enormous strides in understanding how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. Many recent insights point toward promising new strategies for treatment, prevention, and diagnosis.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease as a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
I'm excited about what we're learning these days regarding lifestyle. One of those things that we've seen in the past are things like exercise and nutrition have now started to gain more momentum to indicate to us that it can change your ability to slow cognitive decline. That is really the first stages of Alzheimer's disease. This may include things like social engagement, mental cognitive training. It can be things such as exercise. It can be nutrition. All those things are now starting to point that they will lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
A lot of hope does come from the Alzheimer's Association, all the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day. And I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
It's nice to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention.
As we just heard, there is a lot of hope for where we're headed with Alzheimer's research. One of the key ways to keep research moving in the right direction is through clinical studies. Scientists are looking for new ways to treat Alzheimer's, and there are many drugs currently in the research pipeline. Recruiting and retaining trial participants is now the greatest obstacle, other than funding, to developing the next generation of Alzheimer's treatments. We're going to hear now from some experts about the importance of these clinical studies for the future of Alzheimer's treatments.
It's more important than ever for people to participate in clinical studies. The fact is, right now, we don't have an effective treatment to stop Alzheimer's disease. And if we don't have people participating in clinical trials, we never will. And so participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
Sometimes you hear the phrase, it's a failed trial. That means that it didn't hit the endpoint, it didn't achieve an FDA-approved drug. But I would say as a scientist, the only failed trial is one that doesn't give you valuable information. And if the trial is well designed, if it is a good scientific experiment, you get extremely valuable data so that you can plan the next trial and do the next study even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even a cure.
As we heard from Dr. Fargo, everyone can help to advance Alzheimer's research. It is especially critical that people of diverse races and ethnicities participate in clinical research. Because they are at an increased risk of developing the disease, it's important that researchers are able to study large populations of these individuals to better understand the disease and their elevated vulnerability. Let's take a look at an association service that can help people find studies.
Currently, more than 5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. By participating in clinical research, you can move us toward methods of treatment and prevention for all those affected by this devastating disease. Alzheimer's Association Trial Match is a free clinical studies matching service for those with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers. To start, simply create a confidential user profile and receive a list of studies that may be a match for you. Don't just hope for a cure, help us find one.
So let's take a look at what we just discussed. Scientists have increased their understanding of Alzheimer's significantly over the past decade. People living with the disease, caregivers, and healthy individuals without dementia are needed to participate in clinical studies in order to find methods of prevention, treatment, and ultimately a cure. Both drug and non-drug studies are taking place across the country and online. Clinical studies may provide participants with cutting-edge treatment and additional medical care. Trial Match is a free clinical studies matching service for people interested in participating in Alzheimer's research. Alzheimer's is difficult, but no one has to face the disease alone. So let's learn a little more now about the Alzheimer's Association and how we can help individuals and families across the country. The Alzheimer's Association is in communities across the country, providing direct service to individuals and families facing the disease. The Alzheimer's Association leads the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. The vision of the Alzheimer's Association is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. So the association is available wherever and whenever you need reliable information and support. And on this slide, you can see 3 of our key resources that can connect you to information and support. We talked about the helpline, 800-272-3900, anytime, day or night, to receive information and support. It provides access to highly trained and knowledgeable staff who can help with education, decision-making support, crisis assistance, and resource identification. Master's level clinicians are available around the clock to provide in-depth care consultations, a free of charge care navigation service offered to families at any stage of the disease, and help is available through translation in more than 200 languages. We're going to hear from Tim, who's a care partner, and he has called the helpline for support.
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center when I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask. You know, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did, was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
I completely understand and identify with what Tim just said, because I used that helpline many times. And as he said, I would do it. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night with some anxiety about what was going to happen the next day, or what did I have to do to be a better caregiver? What did I not know that I needed to know? I mean, there's just all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it was just to call and do a little crying on a shoulder that understood what I was going through as a caregiver for this changing daily sort of environment I found myself in. So an excellent way to get support. Next is the website, alz.org. And this is often the first stop for individuals following a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another dementia. It includes sections specifically for people living with the disease and caregivers. We're going to hear from Teresa, who is living with Alzheimer's, about what questions she had and the information she found on the site.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this, where can I go for resources, where can I go for help? What do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
And our third key resource here is the the Alzheimer's Association and AARP Community Resource Finder. We all need help as caregivers, and this is a great way, as both caregivers and persons living with the disease, but it's a great way to find resources in your specific community that can be of some help and support as well. So it's a wealth of community-based services available in your area, including long-term care and community-based services, local association offices, and their offerings of programs and support. So alz.org/CRF. And we'll hear from Tom now, who is also living with Alzheimer's, as he shares his experience seeking help from the association to find local resources.
Since I've been diagnosed with dementia, the one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
So now that we've taken a basic look at Alzheimer's disease and what resources are available, let's talk about how you can take action. There are ways to do this. You can volunteer. Whether you can spare a few hours a week or make a more significant time commitment, consider volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association. There are numerous opportunities available, including becoming a community educator or joining your local walk planning committee. And you can visit alz.org to learn more. Next is advocacy. You can become an Alzheimer's Association advocate and speak out on behalf of the needs and rights of those facing Alzheimer's disease. Now, advocacy is a huge pillar of what the Alzheimer's Association stands for and the activities they have. I joined them one time in Sacramento. It was a scheduled series of appointments with legislators who were either supportive of the Alzheimer's Association's efforts, or were on the fence, or were, having trouble understanding why we needed their policymaking to help for families facing this disease. So advocacy is a huge area of activity that we need help with. We talked about Trial Match. Everyone can help advance Alzheimer's research by participating in clinical studies, clinical trials. You can get started with the Alzheimer's Association Trial Match, which is a free, easy-to-use clinical studies matching service. Walk to End Alzheimer's. You can form or join a team for the Alzheimer's Association Walk to End Alzheimer's and raise critical funds and awareness. This is held annually in more than 600 communities nationwide. Walk to End Alzheimer's is the world's largest fundraiser for Alzheimer's care, support, and research. We just finished a series of our walks in our chapter. You may have seen a little bit on the news, in fact, that was broadcast from San Francisco's walk on Saturday, which got a really big turnout. And then the longest day, the day with the most light, the summer solstice. It's to raise funds and awareness for the care, support, and research efforts of the Alzheimer's Association through an activity of your choice. You can start now and select your activity at alz.org/thelongestday. That's the one that I participate in. One of the things that I did for myself, you often hear as a caregiver to be sure you take care of yourself, which is true and it sounds great, but it's much more difficult than it may seem, because you spend all of your time giving your attention to the person who needs your support and care. But when I was sort of at the height of my stress level, I realized that I needed to get some physical activity. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to free my cluttered mind, so to speak, and I began riding a bike again. I hadn't ridden my bike since I was in college, and I thought, well, if I get out for 10 or 15 minutes every other day, something like that, or half an hour, that'll really help. Well, I found that I reacquainted myself with the enjoyment of cycling so much that I now ride 135 miles a week. So I really fell in love with biking, and now I do it for just complete pleasure and as physical exercise. So that's what I do on the longest day every year, and I'm able to just send out a blast of emails to everybody I know and say, please support me in my effort to end this terrible disease. So there are many ways to get involved with the association, and we've just highlighted a few here. And that brings us to the end of the program, and I will now stop talking, and I'm going to leave this slide up for a couple minutes, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. and we can take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jean, for this very informative presentation for everyone. We do have pretty big crowds. So that's great to see. So I did get one question just recently here. Suzanne asks, is there a list of programs available in Sonoma County that will benefit caregivers? What help is available for those who can't afford assistance with their loved ones with Alzheimer's? And I did touch base with her just a little bit in the chat, but Jean, you can add to it. But I did mention we do have a local office here in Santa Rosa, and I provided the office number. If anybody wants to contact us and just has any general questions, like Suzanne here asking, for those that can't afford assistance, we do have help with that. And so you can give us a call and get more information. But Jean, you can add as well, because you were a caregiver and did seek out this type of help.
Yes, I one of the reasons I do what I do today with the association is to get the word out as much as possible so that people simply know that we're there, that we exist in their community. I learned about the Alzheimer's Association sort of accidentally. When Arthur was still in his early stage, he had joined a adult discussion group, or kind of like a book group, but they didn't read books. They would have some reading material, and then the next week they would share their thoughts or their ideas about what they had read the week before. And I got a call from the facilitator one day advising me that Art could no longer he was no longer participating, and she felt it wasn't in the best interest of the entire group for him to continue participating, which really saddened me. He had been diagnosed, but again, he was still quite highly functional. But in that same phone call, when she advised me that he could no longer join the group, she said, you might want to call the Alzheimer's Association. We were living in San Rafael at the time, and San Rafael, there's also an Alzheimer's office there. And I hung up on that call, and I immediately called the Alzheimer's Association meeting, knowing that I needed to turn somewhere to get more help for Art and for myself. And we were interviewed in the office and invited to join the support groups, which were completely invaluable. I joined the group with spouses, and Art joined the group with those who had the disease. And I can honestly say that support group was a real lifeline for me, because only people who are involved in that level of caregiving for a disease like dementia, which is so unpredictable, could understand each other's concerns and anxieties and difficulties and so forth. So the support groups that the Alzheimer's Association offers are really, really good measures to take if you're in that category. But beyond that, you asked about educational programs, and I think maybe Han provided the link to those programs. So, you can get a lot of what I present in live Zoom programs. Hopefully someday we'll do this in person once we get this pandemic under control. So the association, that helpline, really, I talk about it a lot because it's such a great way to find out what else might be available for your specific needs, including help understanding what financial avenues you might explore, both through grants of the association and through social agencies in your community.
Yeah, just to add on, I have heard a lot of people use the helpline, and they, like I said earlier, use it every day. It is 24/7, so we have trained professionals behind the phone. You can even get a care consultant on the phone and talk to you kind of just about anything, really. If you have any questions, they can answer it, or they can give you resources. But again, since those of you are in Sonoma County, please contact our office. I did add the number in the chat there. If you have any other questions, please do call us and we can get you resources. We can get you to talk to someone to get more information and help you out. But at this time, I don't have any other questions in the chat, but we are open to any other questions. We do have, I think, about 15 more minutes. And so if anybody else has any questions, you can continue to ask them. But I do want to thank Carrie from the Petaluma Library for collaborating with the Alzheimer's Association. I think this turned out very wonderful. There was so many people on, and I hope that it helps you all. And I look forward if we are going to be working with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Han and Jean. I'm really thinking this is a very excellent and informative program, and I hope we can continue it in the future. And also thank you for everyone for joining us and asking some wonderful questions. I appreciate it. But if we have time, if you guys like to stay on, if there's any more questions, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anybody saw my chat in the beginning, but like Carrie said, this will be recorded and it will be posted on the Sonoma County Library on YouTube. And so I will go ahead and share that link once more for anybody, but it's very easy. You just go on YouTube and search up Sonoma County Library, and then the page should pop up, but I will attach the link here in the chat. And then we did get one question come in just now. Someone asked, can someone please offer some advice on how to approach a loved one who you think might have early onset, all with grace and love, and suggest they meet with a doctor to be tested?
Yeah, that's not an easy conversation to have. In one of the other programs that we deliver called the 10 warning signs, we talk about some steps that you can take. If the person is in the earliest stage, or if you're just beginning to notice some of these symptoms, it really is important that you set time aside to have that conversation, as you said, in a loving and calm fashion. But you want to treat the person as the adult that they are, as with the respect that they deserve, but you also want to be honest about what you're observing. You might want to consider, although you know the person best, so whether or not you include other individuals to have that initial conversation. You don't want to gang up on someone and have a confrontation, so it's usually better to do something one-on-one with the person that's closest to. You want to do a little planning ahead to have that conversation, so that you make a few notes about what you want to say and get their advice and offer to go to the doctor with them. You want to remind them that, because you're noticing symptoms, you may not know whether it's dementia or it could be something else. There could be a medication that's causing certain side effects. There could be another underlying medical condition, like depression sometimes can exhibit the same types of symptoms that dementia can. So it's important to narrow down and have the person seen by a doctor. And some people are resistant to that. But again, I hate to keep saying it, but the helpline can even guide you further on some of the techniques for having that conversation. But I think the key is that it's important to have the conversation, both for your well-being and the person you're concerned about.
Maybe the patient would be able to use the helpline if you're gentle with the suggestion.
That's right. That's right. Because again, we're talking about the early stage when we're talking about diagnosis. Once a person has progressed into the moderate and late stage, it becomes pretty obvious what the condition is at that point, and diagnosis is much, I guess, like I say, it's fairly obvious. But so in that early stage, the person is still fairly high functioning. I mean, you heard what some of in the video clips, people living with the disease are quite articulate, easy to understand. They can express a train of thought, but that doesn't mean that they can do that all day long. So in that early stage, the person can certainly call that helpline and get direct advice from those experts who have the experience. I think the one nice thing about that navigation plan or the care navigation plan is that the association experts have the ability to look at what considerations down the road you want to begin to think about and plan for. And that's why I like that care navigation plan process, because each family or each individual is going to have a slightly different plan going forward, depending on their circumstances and their support group level.
Okay, thank you, Jean. And then we did get a comment and then one more question. So this, the first comment is, my mother resists the idea that she is declining cognitively and her GP was not helpful. HIPAA has been difficult to overcome when going to doctor appointments. She is in assisted living, but I would like to help her have as good of a life as possible, although reading, knitting, even TV viewing is no longer a pleasant experience. I'm at a loss.
That's a tough one, because her doctor is really her link to the process of getting proper care from a medical standpoint. And I don't know if it's realistic to find a different provider that might give her greater attention, or the HIPAA thing. I don't know if your mother is able to give you written permission to speak on her behalf. I mean, that, you can go all the way to the legal documentation of power of attorney and things like that, but less formally, if you're having difficulty getting information as her daughter, then I would think there's a way around that by your mother being able to give you permission to communicate on her behalf. That's a challenging question, and I'm not so sure I'm giving you the best answer, but if you don't feel that you're getting the appropriate medical attention that you need, then I think exploring a different provider or providers, or asking for a referral to someone with more specialization, someone who's in gerontology or neurology. Those are the kinds of professions that tend to be better at caring and treating those with dementia.
Yeah, I think that is a great answer. And then our next question is, if someone is in the moderate stage, does it make sense to test for types of dementia?
If it hasn't already been properly diagnosed, I would say yes, it is appropriate. Because the moderate stage, to me, that was the most rapidly changed the early stage went on for quite a while. The moderate stage seemed to pick up speed in terms of the disease progression. So if you feel that they're still in a relatively functioning state, then I would definitely still seek an appropriate diagnosis, just to make sure that there isn't something else going on too.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then
I would say much of the research going on too is in the area of getting a simpler blood test to test for. That isn't done yet, but there's quite a bit of advancement that makes the diagnostic process even easier if they get to that point.
Yeah, and I even think now, if you're older, going to the doctors for like a physical, they sometimes even add that as kind of the general protocol, and seeing if you do need to speak to another specialist, such as what was one of the ones you mentioned, Jean?
Well, someone in gerontology, or
exactly.
Geriatrician, I think they're called, gerontologist.
Yeah. Okay. And so, and then the rest of the people who have commented, those were all very nice comments, just saying thank you all for spending the time to help. Thank you very much, Jean, Han, and Carrie. I see here this was such a valuable information. Well done. Again, thank you everyone who attended today. We hope that you found all this information informative. And again, there are a lot more resources out there, especially within our organization, and even just ones that you're already kind of affiliated with. Like someone mentioned, the Kaiser, their geriatric department, geriatric neurology department is very helpful. And so if those of you, that is a good recommendation. But any other questions before we wrap up here? I do again want to thank Carrie. It's very nice working with you and seeing what a great crowd we got. I'm hoping we can see some of the same faces for a different program in the future.
Definitely. We hope to have you back very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And continue to use your library for other resources. We have lots of books describing Alzheimer's and caregiving. So give us a call anytime and we'll help you find some resources, e-resources or actual books. So thanks so much.